She lost everything after one tragic fall, but what happened when she met the wildest stallion no one could tame? Watch until the end to see what no one expected. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if this moved you. The air was thick with dust and adrenaline. The sound of thundering hooves echoed in Aaliyah Walker's ears as she crouched forward in the saddle, her black braids whipping behind her like flags in the wind. The crowd at the Silver Valley Youth Championship roared around the arena, but Aaliyah heard only the rhythm of her horse beneath her, the heartbeat of a champion. Her horse, Layla, was young, fast, full of fire, and Aaliyah, 17, bold, fearless, was the girl who could ride anything. She had won every junior race in the county and was already being scouted by national stables. In the saddle, she wasn't just free. She was unstoppable. Until the scream. It came from the stands. A single sharp sound that sliced through the crowd noise like a blade. Layla's ears twitched, her muscles tensed. Then the crack. One firework, rogue and unexpected, launched from outside the arena. The boom shattered the moment. Layla reared up violently. Aaliyah's hands tightened on the reins, but the horse panicked, twisting midair. Time slowed. She saw Layla's eyes wide with fear, felt her own body shift weightless, falling. The ground hit her like a hammer. A sickening snap tore through her spine. The next moment was a blur of screams, rushing feet, a chaotic blur of faces and noise. She couldn't move her legs, couldn't feel the earth beneath her. Layla didn't survive. The fall broke the horse's neck. Aaliyah didn't know that at first. She woke up in the hospital to a white ceiling and the sterile scent of antiseptic. Her mother, Nina, sat beside the bed, trying not to cry. When the doctor walked in with the chart and the heavy words, Nina gripped her daughter's hand. "Your spinal cord," he said. "You're paralyzed from the waist down." Aaliyah didn't respond. She didn't cry. She simply stared at the wall. The weeks that followed were quiet. Too quiet. Therapy sessions came and went. She sat in a wheelchair now, a custom-built black frame that rolled smoothly across hospital floors and eventually the hallway of her home. Cards came, balloons, messages from fellow riders, coaches, fans. All of it felt fake, useless. Her world, the real one, was gone, buried with Layla. Every photo of a horse, every whiff of hay or leather sent her deeper into silence. She stopped speaking to her friends. She refused therapy rides, the kind offered for recovery. She didn't want gentle ponies or soft paths. She wanted the fire back. And since she couldn't ride anymore, she wanted nothing at all. Nina tried everything. Therapists, camps. Aaliyah shut them all out. She would wheel herself to her room and close the door. The girl who had once tamed wild colts with a whisper now avoided even looking at a pasture. There were nights when Nina stood on the other side of the door, listening, but her daughter never called out. 1 year passed, then another. The spark in Aaliyah's eyes dimmed. She spoke in short sentences, ate little, stared at the television but never really watched. She still wore her old riding gloves sometimes, not out of hope, but out of habit. They were cracked, stained with the dust of races past. Then came the letter. Silver Ridge Equestrian Showcase, the biggest show in the state, was coming to town. Nina saw the flyer first. Thunder, the wild black stallion who had never been ridden, would be featured. Nina folded the flyer and left it on Aaliyah's bed. She said nothing. Aaliyah didn't touch it for days. But one night, something made her pick it up. She stared at the picture of Thunder, eyes full of fire, mane like midnight. Something stirred, a breath she didn't know she was holding. "I want to go," she said at breakfast, barely above a whisper. Nina didn't ask questions. She just nodded. The arena was crowded that day, loud, alive. Aaliyah rolled into the stands beside her mother, dressed in a worn denim jacket and fingerless gloves. Her face was unreadable. Thunder entered the ring. He was everything the rumors said and more. Massive, furious, unridden. His muscles rippled with rage. He kicked, bucked, bit at the handlers, a war drum on hooves. The crowd gasped and laughed. The announcer joked about him being the devil on 4 legs. Aaliyah leaned forward. Her heart beat fast. Not in fear, but something deeper. Recognition. That fury, that fear, that isolation, it mirrored her own. The show went on, but Aaliyah saw nothing else. Only thunder. After the final bell rang, she didn't ask. She wheeled herself toward the stables. The staff tried to stop her. "You can't go near that horse," one handler warned. "He'll kill you." She didn't answer, didn't stop. She rolled forward. Thunder stood behind the gate, restless. His ears flattened at her approach. He snorted, pawed the ground. Aaliyah stopped a few feet away. Her eyes locked with his. "I know what it's like," she said softly. "To lose everything. To want to run, but not be able to." Thunder didn't charge. He didn't rear. He stood still. For the first time since her fall, so did the storm in Aaliyah's chest. The next few minutes passed like a dream. She lifted her hand. Thunder didn't move. She didn't flinch. Slowly, cautiously, the stallion stepped forward. Then another, until his breath touched her fingertips. Behind them, stunned silence fell over the stable. When Thunder bowed his head in front of her, the world changed. That night, the video went viral, but Aaliyah wasn't thinking about cameras or applause. She was thinking about fire, about storms, about the girl she used to be, and the girl she might become again. She looked at Thunder, and for the first time in 2 years she whispered, "Maybe we're not broken. Maybe we're just not done yet." And in the quiet between them, the journey began. The next morning, the world was already different. Aaliyah woke up to a buzzing phone and a stream of unread messages. Her social media had exploded overnight. The video, Thunder bowing his head to her, had been shared, clipped, reposted with captions like "The Girl Who Tamed the Untamable" and "The Miracle at Silver Ridge." Thousands of likes. Comments flooded in from strangers calling her brave, incredible, inspiring. And yet, she didn't feel any of those things. She just felt still, quiet, as if she were standing on the edge of something she didn't yet understand. Nina was the one who finally knocked on her bedroom door and broke the silence. "They want you back," she said gently. "Silver Ridge. They said if you're willing, you can spend more time with Thunder." Aaliyah turned from the window. She had been watching the clouds roll across the morning sky. "Just me and him?" "They said the arena's open. No pressure, no show, just you." Aaliyah nodded slowly. "Okay." That afternoon she returned. No cameras this time, no audience, just Hank, the old trainer who had been there when it happened, leaning against the fence, arms crossed. He was a man carved by time and sun, with a face like weathered bark and eyes that rarely blinked. "You the miracle girl?" he asked as she wheeled herself forward. "I'm just Aaliyah." "Well, Aaliyah," he said, pushing off the rail, "he's never bowed for anyone. You either scared the hell out of him or gave him something none of us could." Thunder was in the corral, alone. When he saw her, he lifted his head sharply, ears twitching, muscles coiling like springs. But he didn't rear, he didn't bolt. He watched her. Aaliyah rolled to the edge of the fence, then stopped. She didn't speak, didn't move. Thunder took a step toward her, one hoof at a time, deliberate, curious. "He's got scars," Hank said quietly from behind her. "Old ones. From a pack of coyotes, they say. He lost his herd in Nevada. Been wild ever since." Aaliyah nodded. "He's not the only one with scars." The horse stopped just a few feet away now. They stared at each other again, as they had in the ring. This time there were no ropes, no walls, just space between them, and something unspoken in it. For the next few days it became a rhythm. Aaliyah would come in the mornings, sit by the fence, speak softly, or not at all. Sometimes Thunder would pace. Sometimes he'd stand still. Sometimes he'd get so close she could feel his breath. Hank watched from a distance, muttering things like, "Never seen anything like this," and "I don't get it, but it's working." The others didn't all feel the same. One afternoon, as she approached the barn, Aaliyah heard voices, low and sharp. "It's dangerous. She's just a kid. She's not even qualified. She's doing more with him than any of you ever did," Hank cut in, his voice a growl. Aaliyah didn't stop. She rolled past them without a word, toward the only one whose opinion really mattered right now. Thunder was waiting. That day, something new happened. She opened the gate. No one else had dared, not without sedatives or ropes. But she pushed through the fear, rolled inside the corral, and stopped. Thunder turned to her, ears pinned for a moment. He stamped the ground. Aaliyah sat still. "I'm not here to control you," she said calmly. "I know what it's like to lose control." The wind picked up around them, dust swirling in the sun. Thunder stared. She stared back. Then, slowly, the stallion walked toward her and stopped beside her wheelchair. Aaliyah reached out. He let her touch him. Behind the fence, no one spoke. Not Hank, not the doubters, just breathless silence. Over the next week, Aaliyah began working with Hank directly. He didn't smile much, but when he did, it was a quiet nod of approval. "You've got feel," he told her one morning. "Some people learn how to ride horses. You remember how to listen to them." They started with simple things. Thunder would walk alongside her as she wheeled across the corral. Hank built a lightweight rig, a training cart with a secure harness she could guide from her chair. It wasn't a saddle, but it was a beginning. The training was slow. Thunder didn't like anything pulling on him. The first few times he refused to move. Once he even kicked the cart free and bolted. But Aaliyah never raised her voice, never used a whip. She would just wait. Speak softly. Try again. "You don't trust people," she whispered to Thunder after one failed attempt. "I get that. I didn't either. Still don't most days." Eventually, Thunder began to pull the cart. A foot, then a yard, then a full circle around the pen. "He's doing it," Hank said, eyes narrowed. "No," Aaliyah replied, "we're doing it." But the more progress they made, the louder the voices grew. One morning, a letter was posted to the Silver Ridge Public Board, unsigned. A stunt, a risk. That girl and that horse are an accident waiting to happen. Someone needs to stop this before someone gets hurt. Aaliyah read it twice, then folded it into her pocket. She didn't say a word to anyone. That afternoon, she wheeled to the barn as usual. Thunder came to her instantly, as if he knew. She stroked his neck. "They're scared of what they don't understand," she whispered. That night, she sat in her room staring at her gloves, worn leather, sun-bleached, frayed at the fingertips. She slipped them on and called her mother into the room. "I want a ride," she said simply. Nina stared at her, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Ride?" Aaliyah nodded. "I don't care how. I don't care what it takes, but I need to get back in that race." The fire in her eyes was back, not the fire of anger or grief, but purpose. And from that moment forward, everything began to change. By the time word spread that Aaliyah Walker was training to compete in the wild run, the backlash had already begun. What started as admiration quickly twisted into suspicion, and suspicion grew into criticism. Local news outlets that once hailed her as the girl who tamed thunder began airing panels debating whether she was putting herself, or worse, the horse, in danger. Social media turned loud, and not always kind. Comments poured in from people who had never met her, never seen the hours she spent in the barn, but felt qualified to judge her anyway. "She's playing hero for the cameras. This isn't about healing, it's about attention. She's paralyzed, and that horse is dangerous. Who let this happen?" The loudest voice came from a familiar name, Jack Sloan, former state champion, former trainer of Aaliyah before the accident, the man who had walked out of her life the moment she was no longer a winning rider. He appeared on a morning broadcast seated in a crisp blazer, speaking with the calm confidence of a man who had long believed himself an authority. "She was talented," he said, "one of the best. But that was before. What she's doing now isn't brave, it's reckless. That horse is wild. She's in a wheelchair. One wrong move, and someone's going to get seriously hurt." The clip went viral within hours. Aaliyah saw it on her feed, sandwiched between smiling clips of thunder and articles celebrating her return. For a moment, it cut through her like a blade. Not because she believed him, but because deep down, she feared he might not be the only one who did. When she arrived at the barn that day, Hank was already there, leaning against the gate, his face tighter than usual. "You saw it?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah. You want to stop?" Aaliyah looked toward Thunder, who stood at the far end of the pen, still and watchful. "No." That single word was all she had, all she needed. Still, the storm outside continued to grow. The equestrian community became divided. Some admired her grit. Others accused her of setting a dangerous precedent. Parents wrote letters to Silver Ridge management, claiming it would encourage other disabled children to take unnecessary risks. Petitions were started. Anonymous emails flooded the center's inbox. Nina began to worry, not about her daughter's safety. She trusted Thunder more than any person alive, but about the weight Aaliyah was carrying alone. One evening, as Aaliyah sat on the floor of the stable brushing Thunder's thick black coat, Nina entered quietly and leaned against the doorframe. "They're not going to stop," she said gently. "The ones who don't understand." "I know. You don't have to prove anything to them." "I'm not," Aaliyah said. "I'm not doing this for them." Nina stepped closer. "Then why, baby?" Aaliyah paused. She looked up at her mother, her hands still resting on Thunder's side. "Because I lost everything that day, Mom. My legs, my place in the world, my horse, myself. But with him—" She looked back at Thunder, who now turned his head to nuzzle her shoulder. "I don't feel broken. I feel like me again." For a while, Nina said nothing. Then she knelt down beside her daughter and took one of her gloved hands. "Then let them talk. You just keep riding." But as the wild run approached, the pressure escalated. Organizers debated pulling her from the event for safety reasons. Sponsors threatened to withdraw. And, behind the scenes, Sloan lobbied harder, calling in favors, using his influence to push her out. The final blow came 3 days before the race. A Silver Ridge board member visited the stables personally. A tall, sharp woman with a clipboard and cold eyes. "This isn't personal," she told Aaliyah. "We just can't take the liability, you understand? I've trained for months. You're not insured for this level of risk. You didn't stop Sloan when he fractured a kid's rib last year in the fall." The woman's expression didn't change. That was different. Aaliyah wheeled closer, her voice like iron wrapped in velvet. "The only thing different is that I'm in a chair." Hank stepped forward then, his voice low and firm. "She's done more with that horse than anyone I've seen in 20 years. If you pull her now, you'll regret it." The board member didn't answer. She simply turned and left. For the rest of that day, no one spoke much. The barn was quieter than usual. Even Thunder paced less. That night, Aaliyah sat alone in her room, staring at the glove on her lap. Not the old cracked pair, a new one, fresh leather, deep brown, a gift from Hank, left without a note. She thought of all the kids who had written to her, the girl who said she tried to sit on a pony for the first time, the boy with cerebral palsy who had drawn a picture of Thunder with flames around his hooves. She thought of Sloan, of what he had said. She thought of herself. Not the old version, not the Star Rider, not the broken girl in a hospital bed, the one who was here now. She picked up the glove and slid it on. The next morning, before the sun rose, she arrived at the stables early. The sky was still dark, dew on the grass, birds not yet awake. Thunder stood waiting. She wheeled up beside him, her heart beating with steady resolve. "They don't think we belong out there," she whispered, "so we'll remind them why we do." And as the first rays of dawn broke over the hills, Thunder leaned forward and gently rested his massive head against her shoulder. The battle wasn't over, but the choice had been made. They would ride, together. The Wild Run wasn't just a race, it was a tradition, a proving ground, a challenge carved into dirt and legend. Held once a year in the hills just outside Silver Ridge, it was known for chewing up even the strongest riders. 8 kilometers of unforgiven terrain, steep inclines, narrow forest passes, rocky creek beds, and a final stretch of open plain that tested every ounce of endurance a horse and rider possessed. It wasn't just about speed. It was about trust, balance, grit, the kind of race you didn't fake your way through. You either earned the finish line or you didn't cross it at all. 3 days before the race, the list of final participants was released. At the very bottom, below the seasoned champions and rising stars, was one name that made the entire roster buzz. Aaliyah Walker. Division, exhibition. Status, approved. The moment her name went public, chaos followed. Local newspapers ran stories with bold headlines: "Paralyzed teen to compete in Wild Run. Will safety be compromised?" Online debates flared into wildfire. Some praised her bravery. Others called it insanity. Petitions to revoke her approval circled again. Silver Ridge issued a formal statement citing a waiver, emergency protocol, and the supervision of a senior trainer, Hank. None of it silenced the noise. Sloan, of course, made his opinion known. He gave another interview, speaking slowly, his words deliberate and scathing. "She was my student. I know her talent. But this isn't talent anymore. This is recklessness. That girl may have guts, but guts don't stop a runaway stallion on a mountain trail. And make no mistake, Thunder may follow her now, but he's still wild underneath. You can't tame instinct." Aaliyah didn't respond publicly. She didn't give interviews, didn't post online, didn't argue with strangers. She trained. Each morning before sunrise, she and Hank met at the ridge trails. Thunder was fitted with the custom harness Hank had helped her design, a lightweight frame that attached to her reinforced cart fitted with suspension, safety straps, and steering controls connected to a gentle mouthpiece. It wasn't perfect, but it was fast. The rig moved like a part of Thunder's body now, their rhythm forged in patience and repetition. Training wasn't smooth. The terrain was brutal. On one climb, Thunder stumbled on a loose rock, jolting the rig sideways. Aaliyah was nearly thrown from the seat. She hit the side hard, bruising her ribs and knocking the wind out of her lungs. Hank rushed to her side, shouting, "That's it. We're done. We've pushed too far." Aaliyah spat dirt from her mouth and shook her head. "No. Damn it, girl, this isn't a backyard trail. This is a wild run. People get hurt." "Then they should train harder," she said through clenched teeth. He stared at her for a long time, jaw tight, then nodded slowly. "Fine. But you listen to me. This is real now. One mistake, and you don't get a second chance out there." She did listen, and trained harder. They learned every part of the course. She made Thunder pause at turns, approach slopes at angles, memorize where loose gravel gave way to packed dirt. He began to anticipate her voice cues, shift weight subtly beneath her when they turned. Where other horses relied on physical nudges, Thunder relied on instinct, connection. Their language didn't require reins or whips. It was made of trust. The night before the race, Aaliyah sat in the barn alone. Thunder stood beside her, already groomed, his coat smooth and dark as ink, his eyes calm. She whispered to him, her voice steady but soft. "Tomorrow, they're going to watch us like we're a mistake waiting to happen. But you and me, we know better." She stood for a moment, balancing between her chair and the wall, placing her hand gently against Thunder's shoulder. "We're not a warning. We're a promise." Race day dawned with a rising mist and the rumble of trailers arriving at the grounds. Spectators packed the sides of the Stardon Valley. Journalists jostled for camera angles. Drones hovered above the trees, ready to stream the event live across the state. Riders lined up in their divisions. Seasoned competitors mounted sleek thoroughbreds and muscular quarter horses. There was Sloan, seated high on a proud tan mare, his gear polished, his expression smug. Then came Aaliyah. Her cart was rolled into place by Hank, who checked every strap, every bolt. Thunder stood tall, calm, unmoved by the stairs. "You sure about this?" Hank asked. She nodded once. "Are you?" He gave her the ghost of a smile. "I've never been more nervous, so yeah, must be serious." They exchanged no further words. The announcer's voice thundered through the speakers. "Riders, prepare for launch in 10 seconds. Sloan looked over, smirking. "Hope your wheels don't fall off." Aaliyah stared straight ahead. "Hope your horse knows how to follow you without reins." The gun fired. Thunder surged forward, and the world narrowed into speed and thunder and dust. The first kilometer was flat, a warm-up for what was to come. Riders jostled for position, hooves pounding dirt, wheels cutting furrows. Aaliyah stayed back, conserving Thunder's energy, letting him set his own pace. They passed 3 riders before the first incline. The climb was steep, winding through a narrow ridge of stone. One wrong step could mean disaster. Thunder scaled it with practiced grace, his footing precise. Aaliyah braced against the pull of the cart, leaning forward, whispering, "Easy, just like we trained." Sloan was ahead, pushing hard, too hard. His mare was sweating heavily by the 4th kilometer. Aaliyah saw him glance back, irritated to find her closer than expected. The forest stretch was the worst. Shadows played tricks on depth perception. Roots twisted underfoot. Thunder hesitated once, then found his rhythm. A sudden shout echoed from behind. A rider had fallen. Another horse refused to cross a shallow stream. The race was starting to claim its casualties. At kilometer 6, the turning point came. A stone hidden in the undergrowth jarred the rig. One wheel caught, the frame bucked sideways, and Aaliyah nearly lost her grip. The cart tipped. She held on by one hand. "Thunder!" she cried. The stallion stopped. One breath, then he stepped forward and adjusted. The cart rocked back into place. Aaliyah gasped, shook her head clear, and whispered, "We keep going." The final hill loomed. Sloan was still ahead, but not by much. He saw her coming and spurred his horse hard. Thunder didn't need prompting. He ran. The sound of hooves on hard-packed earth was deafening. The wind lashed Aaliyah's face. Her fingers locked on the controls. Her body screamed with effort. 50 meters, 30. They pulled even. 10 meters. Aaliyah didn't look at Sloan. She didn't need to. She looked only at the finish line, and crossed it. The silence after was surreal. Then came the roar. Thunder slowed, breathing hard, chest heaving, sweat pouring. Aaliyah sat still in the rig, heart pounding. She didn't raise her fists, didn't cheer. She reached forward and touched Thunder's neck. "We did it," she whispered. "We really did it." And as the cameras zoomed in and the announcers tried to put the moment into words, Aaliyah just smiled, quiet and full, as if a missing piece of her had finally returned. The world felt different after the finish line. As Thunder came to a stop and lowered his head, steam rising from his body like breath from a dragon, Aaliyah sat motionless in the rig, her chest rising and falling with every shaky inhale. For a moment, all she could hear was the rush of blood in her ears. The cheers of the crowd, the clatter of horses being reined in, the announcements blaring through loudspeakers, all of it sounded distant, muffled by something deeper. She looked at Thunder's slick black neck and let her hand fall gently against his coat. They had done it. They hadn't just finished the wild run. They had crossed the finish line first. When Hank reached them moments later, he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His eyes were glassy, his jaw clenched, but his hands were steady as he helped detach the rig harness. Thunder stood proudly beside them, his chest still rising like bellows. The stallion wasn't wild now. He wasn't broken either. He was whole. And so was she. The crowd surged forward, clapping, yelling, reaching with cameras and questions. Microphones were shoved in her face. How did you do it? What was going through your mind? Do you realize what you've accomplished? Aaliyah didn't answer. She simply smiled, nodded, and let herself be guided away from the chaos. Thunder followed without a rope, without resistance, as though tethered to her heartbeat. That evening, the coverage exploded. News stations replayed footage of the race on loop. Headlines beamed from every screen. Paralyzed teen wins wild run. The girl and the wild stallion who changed everything. Commentators argued about whether it was the most inspiring sporting moment of the decade. Others still doubted, trying to deconstruct the victory into technicalities and exceptions. But none of it mattered, because the moment that stayed burned in everyone's minds wasn't the finish. It was the connection. The way Thunder had slowed after the race to nuzzle her shoulder. The way Aaliyah had leaned against him, not like a master celebrating triumph, but like an equal breathing in the silence they had earned together. 3 days after the race, Aaliyah received a formal invitation from the Silver Ridge Equestrian Center. They wanted her and Thunder to appear at a youth event for children with disabilities. Aaliyah hesitated at first. The spotlight had never been her goal. She hadn't done any of this to inspire anyone. She had done it for herself, for Thunder. but something about the idea sat in her chest like an ember waiting to glow. When she arrived at the therapy center, the first thing she noticed was how quiet it was. Not silent, but calm. Horses moved slowly in open pens. Children in wheelchairs and walkers laughed and pointed. A few rode with the assistance of trainers. Others simply brushed and fed the animals. Their faces were soft with concentration and joy. They didn't look broken. They didn't look limited. They looked alive. The director met her at the entrance, a woman in her 40s with warm eyes and sunburned cheeks. She greeted Aaliyah like an old friend. "You've already made more difference than you know," she said. "Some of these kids haven't spoken in weeks." Then they saw your video. They started asking about the wild run, about the girl in the rig with the black horse. Aaliyah said little. She just nodded and followed as she was led to the large central pen where a small crowd of children had gathered, eyes wide with wonder. Thunder stepped in beside her, his body calm, his eyes scanning the group with slow, deliberate movement. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. The first child to approach was a girl named Sophie, 8 years old, nonverbal, diagnosed with severe autism. Her parents stood nearby, clearly unsure of what to expect. But Sophie didn't hesitate. She walked slowly to Thunder, her small hand raised like a question. Thunder dipped his head. She touched his nose and smiled. Her parents cried. Later that afternoon, a boy named Eli wheeled himself over. He was 12, small for his age, and stiff from the waist down. His mother explained he'd been in a car accident and hadn't shown interest in animals since. Aaliyah knelt beside him. "Want to try leading him?" Eli didn't answer at first. Then, slowly, he reached for the rope. Thunder followed him around the circle like a shadow, one slow step at a time. Eli didn't smile, but his eyes lit with something quiet and powerful. When they stopped, he whispered so softly it was almost lost in the breeze. "He's not scary at all." Aaliyah smiled. "Neither are you." After the children had gone, the director returned to her side. "I've been doing this for 15 years, she said, "and I've never seen anything like what happened here today." "It's not me," Aaliyah replied. "It's Thunder." The woman placed a hand on her shoulder. "No, it's both of you, together." That night, Aaliyah and Thunder returned to their stable. The barn was quiet. The stars outside were scattered across a deep velvet sky. She sat beside him as he ate, brushing his mane slowly, watching how the dim light caught the scar on his side. He had been alone once. She had been broken. The world had told them what they couldn't be, what they'd never do again. But now they were more than survivors. They were a symbol of what came after survival. Not a return to the past, but a transformation. Aaliyah looked up at the stars and whispered, "What now?" As if in answer, Thunder nickered softly and nudged her hand. And she knew. This wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of a new one. The morning after the youth event, the barn was quiet. Aaliyah arrived early, the sun still low, casting golden light through the slats in the walls. Thunder stood in his usual corner, calm as ever, watching her with those deep dark eyes that always seemed to know more than he should. She wheeled herself forward and sat beside him for a long moment in silence. It was a peace she'd come to crave, the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty but full. But peace wasn't permanent. Later that day, Silver Ridge released an official statement announcing the launch of a new initiative, an inclusive riding program inspired by the bond between Aaliyah and Thunder. They called it the Walker Project. The news spread fast. Media requests started flooding in again. News stations, national morning shows, podcast interviews, magazine features. Everyone wanted a piece of the girl who had won the wild run in a wheelchair. People called her a hero, a fighter, an inspiration. But Aaliyah didn't feel like any of those things. She felt overwhelmed. She hadn't asked for attention. She hadn't done this to become a symbol. And now it felt like the world was lifting her up for something she wasn't sure she wanted to carry. It only got louder when a national sports network aired a segment criticizing the race. They showed footage of Thunder pulling her through the steep forest paths, slowed down to make it seem chaotic. They interviewed experts who had never met her. One commentator went so far as to say, if that horse had slipped even once, this would be a tragedy, not a triumph. Aaliyah sat on the couch that night, the television muted, watching their faces move as if their words had weight. Thunder lay just outside the window in the pasture, his black coat catching moonlight. Nina entered the room, a cup of tea in each hand. She offered one to her daughter and sat beside her. "You don't have to listen to them," she said. "I know," Aaliyah replied quietly, "but they're not wrong. I did take a risk. I could have gotten hurt." Nina turned to her. "You did something no one else could. You built a bridge between worlds people thought were too far apart. You didn't just ride that horse. You trusted him, and he trusted you." Aaliyah didn't respond. She just stared at the screen. "What if I can't live up to it?" she finally whispered. Nina set her cup down. "You don't have to live up to anything. You already did it. And if you stop now, you're still that girl who changed everything." But Aaliyah wasn't ready to stop. Not yet. She just didn't know where to go next. The next day, she returned to the therapy center, but this time, she didn't just stay near the pen. She led the activities. She taught the children how to read a horse's body language, how to breathe around them, how to move without moving. She showed them how trust was built in silence, not in commands. Thunder was flawless. He responded to every cue, every touch. He walked beside a boy who screamed when touched by anyone else. He stood still for a girl who couldn't speak but smiled when her fingers ran through his mane. He wasn't the wild stallion anymore. He was something else now, something gentler, stronger, and wiser. At the end of the day, the therapy center's director approached Aaliyah with a new proposal. She wanted to offer Aaliyah a permanent position, not just as a visiting guest, but as a mentor, a teacher, a leader. Aaliyah hesitated. "I'm not a therapist," she said. "I'm not trained." "You don't need a certificate to connect with people," the director replied. "You just need to show up, and you've already done more for these kids in a few visits than some professionals manage in months." Aaliyah went home that night with the offer weighing heavily on her chest. It was a new direction, a new identity, but also a new kind of responsibility. She sat alone in the stable with Thunder, her hand resting on his warm side. "What if I'm not ready for this?" she murmured. Thunder didn't move. He just leaned against her slightly, like he always did, solid, steady, present. That weekend, she received a letter. Not a message, not a tweet, a real letter, handwritten in careful loops and curves. It was from Eli. "Thank you for letting me walk, Thunder. I've never felt strong before, but now I think maybe I am." Aaliyah read it twice, then a third time. Her eyes burned. She folded the letter and placed it inside her journal. Later that night, she pulled on her old riding gloves, wheeled herself out into the open field, and watched the stars slowly spill across the sky. Thunder walked beside her, no saddle, no bridle, no reins. She looked at him and said, maybe we weren't meant to go back to who we were. Maybe we were meant to become something new. She reached out, and he nudged her palm with his nose. They stood there in the open dark, surrounded by quiet and stars and all the space in the world for whatever came next. Aaliyah didn't have all the answers, but she had Thunder, and together they would keep moving forward. The field stretched wide and golden under the setting sun, the sky above painted in deep oranges and soft purples. Aaliyah wheeled herself slowly across the packed dirt path, the familiar sound of Thunder's hooves matching the rhythm of her wheels beside her. There were no cameras now, no microphones, no reporters asking how it felt to win or what she would do next. There was only the quiet of the open field, the rustle of wind in the grass, and the low breath of a stallion who had once been untouchable, and now was hers. 2 weeks had passed since the wild run, since the therapy sessions, since the headlines began to fade. But Aaliyah didn't mind the quiet. She welcomed it. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was chasing something or running from it. She was simply there, moving forward in the company of the horse that had changed her life. The therapy center had officially launched their new program, and Aaliyah had accepted the position. Twice a week, she returned to the stables not to train for glory or push past another line, but to help kids like Eli, like Sophie, like herself. She didn't wear uniforms or badges. She wore gloves, the same pair Hank had given her the day before the race, the leather dark and worn, now fitting perfectly to her fingers like they were made for her. When she spoke to the kids, it was never about winning. It was about listening. Listening to the horses, to the silence, to themselves. Thunder had changed too. He still had his fire, still flared his nostrils at strangers or stomped when flies annoyed him. But when Aaliyah spoke, he settled. When children touched him, he stilled. When she approached, he always moved to meet her. His trust had become something visible, something almost sacred. People watched it happen and called it magic. But Aaliyah knew it wasn't magic. It was earned. That afternoon, she received a message from Silver Ridge. They wanted her to speak at the annual showcase this time, not as a competitor, but as a guest of honor. They wanted her to share her story, to stand in front of the same crowd that had once doubted her and tell them what Thunder had taught her. The idea terrified her. Not because of the crowd, but because she wasn't sure how to explain something that lived so deeply inside her. How do you explain to a crowd of strangers what it feels like to be shattered and then made whole again by something that doesn't even speak your language? She asked Hank what he thought. "You don't have to explain it," he said, cleaning Thunder's tack without looking up. "You just have to tell the truth. That's more than most people do." Aaliyah thought about that all night. About truth. About the first time she saw Thunder in the arena, hooves lashing, eyes blazing, and how something in her recognized that fire because it had been in her, too. She remembered the fear after the fall, the hospital ceiling, the cold diagnosis, the silence from friends who didn't know what to say. She remembered the gloves on her lap, and the way her mother had kept talking to her even when she didn't respond. And she remembered the moment Thunder stepped toward her, not as a tamed beast, but as something wild and hurt and willing. That was the truth. The day of the showcase arrived, and she wheeled onto the platform beside Thunder. The stands were full. Not the way they had been before, boisterous and amused, but quiet, attentive, respectful. She didn't wear a rider's uniform. She wore a plain white shirt, jeans, and her gloves. Thunder stood calmly behind her like a sentinel. She didn't read a speech. She didn't bring notes. She looked out at the crowd and said, 2 years ago, I thought I was done. I thought I had lost everything, and in a lot of ways I had. But then I met a horse who had lost just as much. He didn't let anyone near him. He didn't trust anyone, and neither did I. But when we saw each other, something changed. Not because either of us was trying to prove anything, but because we saw the hurt in each other and didn't look away. She paused. The wind shifted gently across the mic. Thunder snorted behind her. This isn't a story about how I came back stronger, or how I beat the odds. It's about learning that healing doesn't mean going back to who you were. Sometimes it means becoming someone new, and not being afraid of that. The crowd was still. Then they stood, one by one. She didn't hear the applause the way most people did. She felt it like a heartbeat through the air, and Thunder lowered his head beside her as if bowing not to the audience, but to her. That evening, she returned to the field where it had all started. No events, no stage, just her and Thunder. The sky dimmed and stars began to appear one by one. She wheeled herself into the center of the open space and stopped. Thunder stood beside her. She looked up at him. We did it. Not just the race, not just the speech, all of it. She reached up and touched his mane, and he nuzzled her cheek. And for a while they stood there, surrounded by silence and wind and memory. Aaliyah didn't know what the future would bring. Maybe more children to teach. Maybe more rides through dirt trails and distant forests. Maybe more days just like this one. But she knew this. They were no longer fragments, no longer what had been lost. They were what had survived. They were freedom. They were movement. They were trust. And together they were unstoppable. What started as a fall became a journey of trust, strength, and healing. If this story touched you, like the video, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from.